Hello, I am Remo, yes man, and today I would like to talk about Starfield because Starfield is truly a mid-tier game, and if I can dissuade anybody from buying this thing, I will be doing you a public service. And considering the fact that I've played just about every Bethesda game in the past 15 years, I'm not in a position to be charitable here. So let's just go ahead and jump into it with the intro. Now, first of all, the intro to this game is extremely weak. Your introduction is one of the most important parts of your game because if the intro falls flat, it kind of lays the groundwork for what the rest of the game is going to be like. And based off the shitty ass intro to Starfield, I should have knew the game was going to be basic as fuck. You start the game off as some space miner slash freelancer and you're working a job for this chick named Min. And as you're working a job, you guys are attempting to dig up this artifact. And in the process of getting this artifact, you happen to touch the artifact and you start having random visions of random space shit. And I say random space shit because it's really not explained. Even 50 hours into the game, it really wasn't explained. It was just like random space shit, like random like constellations and like galaxies and shit. It wasn't explained at all. But as a result of that, this new black dude named Barrett shows up who's apparently with this group called the Collective that's collecting these pieces of the artifact, and he's come down to retrieve this piece. But as he's attempting to retrieve this piece of the artifact, pirates or bandits or mercenaries or some shit attack you guys, and you have to fight these guys off. After you fight off the pirates or mercenaries, for some reason, this dude Barrett insists on giving you his ship so you can take the artifact back to the collective. And all while this is going on, he insists on taking your place in this lame ass space mining expedition since technically you have a contract to fulfill. And that's basically how the game starts and how you get your first ship. It's really weird and it was really confusing, and most of all, it was really uninspiring. Like I had to actively stop myself from looking at TikTok while this shit was going on. Next thing I want to do is I want to touch on the planets real quick because the vast majority of your time playing this game is going to be spent walking through planets. So without further ado, now, the planets in the planetary exploration in Starfield is extremely dull and extremely boring. Most of the planets come across as procedurally generated, and there's nothing wrong with that if there's shit to do on the planet. But the problem is, most of these planets don't have anything to do on them. It's like landing on an empty ass ocean with objectives that are few and far between. And traversing these planets takes extremely long because there's no vehicle besides your ship. But unfortunately, you can't just fly your ship to other objectives. So you end up traversing across these empty ass maps trying to get to an objective, and it's fucking boring, you know? You end up falling asleep. And to be honest, I know in real life, exploring most of these planets would be extremely dull and extremely lifeless. But to be honest with you, this is a fucking video game. This is a fucking video game. So there still needs to be some level of fun here in your video game. And exploring these planets is not fun. It's just boring. Like, it makes me want to fall asleep. The Outer Worlds, developed by Obsidian, is a much better space exploration game than Bethesda's Starfield is. The Outer Worlds didn't have nearly the budget that Bethesda's Starfield had, and it didn't have nearly the amount of planets that Starfield has, but the few planets that it did have were absolutely beautiful. From the moment you start the game and you get out to explore your first planet, the color palette on the planets were absolutely stunning, and it was a sight to behold. Whereas when you look at Starfield, most of the planets are dull and empty, and they're not fun to explore. And Starfield's maps are so lifeless and empty, they just come across as extremely lazy. especially when you contrast them with Bethesda's previous work. Load up any Bethesda game and walk from one end of the map to the other, and you will have experienced the vast majority of what each planet offers in its entirety in Starfield. And I'm actually willing to go farther than that and say if you load up Fallout 3 or Skyrim, or even if you load up Fallout 4, walking from one end of the map to the other is a lot more engaging than doing it in Starfield, for the simple fact that a lot more love and intimacy went into designing those maps rather than Starfield's procedurally generated garbage. Fallout 4 was one of the most mid-tier Fallout games to ever be released, and Starfield makes Fallout 4 look like an absolute masterpiece. This game is literally a glorified walking simulator, with 80% of your gameplay being walking from one objective to the other. But at least with the implementation of Fallout 4, Bethesda added a sprint button, which is about the most innovating that they did in that game. But I know it may be kind of unreasonable to ask for infinite sprint, but why the fuck don't we have vehicles in this game? I was wondering why we didn't have vehicles in Fallout 4, and people were like, oh, well, it's just not that type of game. Well, shit, now we have Starfield, which is a whole ass space exploration shooter, supposedly. And guess what? We're still on foot, even though we have a spaceship, right? So why the fuck don't we have vehicles? Now, there are vehicles around the world of Starfield, ground vehicles in particular, but most of these vehicles are just asset placed around a dull ass map to seemingly give the place life. And even your ship, right? Half of your ship's function is to be a glorified loading screen when it's time to do a scene transition. The ship you fly around in Starfield is the equivalent of a ship in Warframe, except a ship in Warframe has way more space and functionality to begin with. And I know you can upgrade your ship later in Starfield, but that's after you do a bunch of investing in the piloting skill and a bunch of other dumb shit. And your ship is so small in the beginning of the game that the amount of crew that the game squeezes into that motherfucker had me literally on the floor laughing because there was literally no space to move around. Bethesda has been making this style of game for almost 20 years, and for some reason, Bethesda never thought it was a good idea to implement vehicle transportation for the player. And to be honest, usually Bethesda can get away with shit like this because usually walking through a Bethesda map is actually pretty engaging and it's fun discovering new locations. But when 90% of the planets on your star system are empty and boring as fuck with nothing to do, you don't feel a ton of incentive to explore. And I'm sure there's some shit out there that's cool, right? I'm sure there is cool shit out there to find. But when all the planets are this empty, I don't feel like spending an hour walking across an empty ass planet just to find some cool shit that may or may not be there, especially when I have a whole ass spaceship that you won't even let me fly short distances across the planet. Now, as you're making your way through Starfield, the vast majority of the time you're just going to be walking and walking and walking. But the other X% of the time you're actually going to be shooting. You're going to be using your weapons, right? So the gunplay needs to be fun, right? And honestly, the guns and weapons in Starfield feel extremely dull. Like, I will give them credit, they do feel good to use, but they just feel dull as all hell. There is nothing really that special about any of these weapons, or at least any of the weapons I have found 50 hours in. Like, most of my weapons were just basic guns that shoot bullets. And I did eventually get a laser rifle, but even the laser rifle was kind of underbaked. The laser rifle, it didn't have an animation where it cinematically disintegrated people like laser rifles in past games. So as a result of that, it just felt like another standard gun. I didn't get any plasma pistol or any plasma rifle. Like, this is Starfield. Where the fuck are my plasma pistols and my plasma rifles? Where's my goddamn Gatling laser? Like, this is Starfield. You would think for a space exploration shooter, there would be way more futuristic gadgets and weapons across the environment to dispatch your enemies with. But instead, the weapons that we do have are lame as fuck and they're dull and boring, you know? Where's my goddamn beam sword, you know? Where's my flamethrower? Where's the incinerator or the shock baton as seen in past Fallout games? And to be honest, I'm not saying that that stuff is not in the game. I'm just saying that 50 hours in, I did not find it. When you look at Fallout New Vegas, 50 hours into Fallout New Vegas, you had a ton of unique weapons to play with unique ammo capabilities. And that's one thing that a lot of people overlook about Fallout New Vegas, and one system that Bethesda never expanded on. Most of the weapons you have unique ammo capabilities. Like, you can use plus P ammo. If you had trouble getting through an enemy's armor, you could use armor piercing rounds. If you were using a laser weapon, right, and you were dealing with a particularly tough weapon, you could switch your ammo to overcharge rounds, or you can switch it to max charge rounds, right? It added a lot of depth to the gameplay. It added a whole new layer of depth to the gameplay when you're engaging enemies. And Starfield doesn't have any of that. Starfield just has basic ass gunplay that feels like we're stuck in the Fallout 4 era. And to be honest, even the gunplay in Fallout 4 felt much better than the gunplay in Starfield. Like, when you look at some of the weapons in past Fallout games, Fallout New Vegas had that hollow rifle that can blast enemies almost across the map. You had laser rifles. You had Father Elijah's laser rifle, which was a signature laser rifle, you know? You had an anti-personnel rifle. You had mods for these weapons that would give these weapons even more unique capabilities. You had Fat Mans, which were mini nuke launchers. You had Fat Mans with little boy mods. In the little boy mod, it would turn that mini nuke into a little cluster bomb. The unique weapon capabilities in past Bethesda games, and yeah, I know Fallout New Vegas wasn't developed by Bethesda, but it's still technically a Bethesda game. And it's crazy that you would have all of that under your belt. And instead of having a system in Starfield from past Fallout games that you have innovated on, you basically just have a dumbed down version of that system, or you don't have the system in its entirety in your new game. And it just comes across as extremely lazy. Even in Fallout 4, which was Bethesda's most recently created Fallout game, Fallout 4 had a bunch of unique weapons when you got past all the pipe pistol variation bullshit. Fallout 4 had a ton of unique legendary weapons. Anytime you killed a legendary enemy, they would drop a legendary weapon, and each legendary weapon had a special effect. Some of these legendary weapons would have a faster attack speed. Some of these legendary weapons would do additional damage to human enemies. Some of these legendary weapons would give you plus 50 damage to ghoul enemies. I had one assault rifle in particular that came with explosive rounds, and it did AoE damage. And it was cool because anytime an enemy was hiding in cover, I wouldn't even have to directly shoot that enemy. I could literally just shoot next to him, and the AoE damage would kill the enemy. Like, you had a ton of unique weapons in Fallout 4, and instead of innovating on that shit in Starfield, it's just not here, or it's replaced with this bullshit ass gunplay system. And like I said, the guns, they do feel fine. They feel fine. It just doesn't feel like it's been innovated on since your last game, you know? So even though the gunplay feels fine, it still feels boring as fuck and it feels kind of lazy, to be honest. The weapons that we do have in Starfield, they feel fine to use, but they all basically feel like the same weapon. And to be honest with you, I do have some weapons with special effects, like I have some poisonous weapons and some radioactive weapons, but the complexity is so dumbed down that you don't even notice any kind of a status effect when you're using them. As a result, the weapons just feel extremely basic. Next, let's talk about your lockpicking minigame, because your lockpicking minigame is ass, and it's crazy because you had a decent lockpicking minigame. You had like the standard lockpicking minigame that a lot of other games would steal and implement for their own games. But instead, you implement this bullshit because you're trying to innovate on your lockpicking system when you really didn't need to innovate. Instead, you have this awful lockpicking mini game where there's just a bunch of circles with slots you have to fill out. And to be honest, it's not too hard because in the corner, right, when you highlight a circle, it will actually glow if it fits that slot. If you can rotate it and it fits that slot. But even then, right, sometimes if you fuck up and you have to undo a lot of these circles that you already did, it can cost you a ton of lock picks. And as a result of that, you kind of just have to end up saving and loading. And sometimes the RNG on your lockpick is really good and you can get this done really quick. But sometimes it's just complete bullshit and it costs you more lockpicks than it should have. And you have to save and load. And it's just kind of a hassle because it's taking up valuable time that you really don't even want to spend doing this shit, you know? So to have a lockpicking mini game like this that's not even fun and that's kind of confusing to begin with is just not a good look, Bethesda. Next, let's talk about the skills, because the skills in Starfield are comically bad. All of the skills in perks are, well, you know what? I'm not going to say all of them. Most of them seem negligible to the point where it seems like you could just avoid them. I'm 50 hours into the game and I've only picked up about like 7 of these perks. And to be honest, the only ones that I've really found useful were the boost pack training for my jump efficiency, the medicine, obviously, you know, that way my healing items are a little more effective. The melee perk, that way my melee does 25% more damage. The thief perk, I use that like once or twice, but I don't necessarily find pickpocketing useful at all in this game. And I don't necessarily find myself using stealth that often either. And the weightlift training to increase my carrying capacity, but even the weightlift training is bullshit. I think I'm at like rank 3 and I'm only at 185 pounds, which is absolutely awful. So that really fucks with my inventory management. And I haven't found too many of these perks really useful or impactful on the gameplay. And then on top of that, every time you level up a perk, it immediately hard locks you and it makes you complete a challenge to unlock the next rank of that perk. Gone are the days where you can level up and just allocate 18 points into science, and within like 5 levels, you've maxed out science, or you've maxed out lockpicking, or you've maxed out energy weapons, and then you didn't have to worry about that for the rest of the game. Gone are those days. Now, upon leveling up a perk, it immediately hard locks you. So say if you want to get to the next rank of lockpicking, you would have to unlock 10 locks or some bullshit like that in order to unlock the next rank of that perk. And it just kind of sucks, you know? Especially like piloting, like to unlock the next rank of piloting, I think you had to destroy more ships or something like that. And the ship combat was kind of bullshit. But yeah, this is the perk system that they've implemented in Starfield. And 50 hours into the game, I really didn't even have that many skill points to spend, even though I was at rank 20. Next, let's talk about the companions, because the companions in Starfield are some of the least impactful companions I have ever seen in a Bethesda game. Most of the time, I didn't even realize these guys were there. I think these guys may have some kind of special perks, but I didn't care enough to check any of them out to see if they did have a special perk. And I think some of them may have interesting backstories, but 50 hours in, I really don't even remember anything about any of these characters, which says a lot about them, you know? Most of the companions seem kind of AI generated, and there doesn't seem to be anything special about them. And to be honest, I think Sarah right here probably seems to be my most favorite companion because although she may not be that interesting, she does appear to have a bright future behind her, if you know what I mean. But yeah, mainly the companions in this game just kind of suck. And these guys ain't no Raul with his regular repair perk, are they ain't no Fox with his goddamn Gatling laser, and they sure as hell ain't no dog meat. These companions just kind of come across as dull and boring, to be honest. And I hate to keep bringing it up, but the Outer Worlds had a much better companion system than Starfield did. And the Outer Worlds actually had a dedicated button to the companions to where you're in combat and you could have a companion target an enemy and use their special ability. And it was cool because it played a nice little cinematic animation, you know, whether you had a companion running up and smashing an enemy with a hammer, or whether you had a companion running up and jump kicking a guy. It was just cool, right? And it just seems like Obsidian is outdoing Bethesda on every level. Like Obsidian is literally out here out Bethesdaing Bethesda. Next, let's talk about the ship combat because the ship combat is fairly basic, but it actually works. And the ship combat is actually kind of fun when it's working properly. I'm not playing on PC, I'm playing on the Xbox Series X personally. And from what I can tell, the ship combat is fine as long as it's working properly. From what I can tell, you have your primary weapon, your secondary weapon, and a special weapon, be it a missile or an EMP. And everything seems to just function, you know? I haven't made too many upgrades to my ship because I didn't give that much of a fuck to make too many upgrades to my ship because the whole system is a little confusing, to be honest. And I didn't care enough to watch a 15-minute video on what I need to know to properly upgrade my ship. But the ship combat works, you know, and it is fun. But what I will say about the space combat is there's a level of randomness that could ruin your day depending on what difficulty setting you're on. Like the game is pretty laughably easy, so obviously I was playing on hard mode at first, but I had to switch the game to easy mode because although the enemies are really easy on hard mode, the ship combat was extremely difficult and I was getting my ass dug out playing the ship combat on hard mode because most of the time when you're engaging ships, oftentimes you're engaged in 2 to 3 ships, you know, and there's always going to be a level of randomness there. But when you're on hard mode and you're engaging 2 to 3 ships, like the ship combat, it doesn't seem very balanced, or maybe it is, and I'm just not good to begin with. But on hard mode, these guys will run you out the building every fucking time. So you really have to know what you're doing on hard mode. And it creates this weird ass dichotomy where the standard combat is extremely easy, so you want to play on hard mode, but at the same time you don't want to have to switch between hard and easy mode when you're engaging in the ship combat, and as opposed to when you're engaging in the standard combat, you know. So it's really weird from a balancing standpoint, you know. It's like you're playing two totally different games on hard mode. But yeah, you know, the ship combat overall is not that bad. It's fairly basic and it works for what it is. So I won't give Bethesda too much crap for the ship combat. Let's talk about fun. I did not have a lot of fun while playing this game. Like, there were definitely fun moments, but for the most part, I did not have a lot of fun while playing this, and I had to force myself to keep playing this because I wanted to make a video on the game, but I didn't want to just quit 10 hours in. And I remember someone saying it only gets fun after like the 12-hour mark or some shit, right? So I kept playing. Then next thing I knew, I was at 20 hours, and it's not even like I had a bunch of fun, and I don't even know what the fuck I did. I don't even remember what the fuck I did. You know, I feel like I just did a bunch of random shit. I didn't have any real memorable experiences, and everything seemed so disconnected that eventually I started just only proceeding with the main story mission. But even the main story missions just seem like ass because it's just I'm going for these relics on all these different planets. Some of the relics are small, some of the relics are big, but each time I get to the relic, I have to kind of mine the relic up, and I touch the relic and I have a vision of some random space shit. It's just like a random cosmos or a random constellation or some random shit, right? And eventually you start getting these powers, right? Eventually you start getting these powers, but like I think I only got a few of the powers, and even then it's not like I was already bored with the game, and it's not like the powers were gonna make a meaningful difference in my gameplay to the point where it would have made me more immersed in the experience at hand. Like, I was literally falling asleep while playing this. I remember one day I got off work and I was like, I know I put 50 hours into Starfield, but let me just hop on Starfield since I've been playing that game. You know, it's in the rotation of games I've been playing, so let me go ahead and just hop on Starfield. And I hopped on Starfield, and I remember having a random space encounter talking to this random ship, for some random shit in space. You know, sometimes when you go to like a new area, sometimes you'll just have a random contact with a random spaceship. And I remember I was doing this and trying to see what this guy want. And I remember as I was doing this little side quest, I was just falling asleep. Like, I was just dozing off. You know, I obviously had just got off work, but I was just falling asleep, you know, and I was like, dude, I just don't want to play this, I guess. So I turned off the game and I turned on Bloodborne, and I shit you not, I turned on Bloodborne. I literally played Bloodborne for 3 fucking hours before I went to sleep, you know. I turned on Bloodborne and it's like I was instantly awake. You know, I don't know what the fuck it was. It's like I was instantly awake as opposed to Starfield where I was falling asleep. So it's like, fuck, man. Starfield is like one of those games that I need to play when I'm ready to go to sleep or some shit. And even then, the game is just not fun. And it's just not something I want to play. And it's not an experience that I want to engage in. When you look at Starfield as a whole and you compare it to Fallout 4, in many ways, Bethesda's game design has actually regressed. And a lot of the features that they had in Fallout 4 are not in Starfield. And yeah, you can make the argument that they are two different games, but I would make the argument that they're actually the fucking exact same game. Starfield is just Fallout 4 with a space aesthetic. And instead of having one really good map with a bunch of interesting locations and cool objectives on it, Bethesda has stretched that across an entire universe by using procedural generation. And what you experience in the game is all a result of that. And it says a lot about Bethesda's game design, you know? It's really lazy and it's really uninspired. And the creation engine in general just needs to be retired. Bethesda has gotten too comfortable with the creation engine, so comfortable to the point that they are afraid to move on from that engine. They've had so much success and so many breakout hits with the creation engine that they're literally afraid to move on and innovate with their game design. When you look at Breath of the Wild and you contrast that to past Legend of Zelda games, you get to see the innovation of Nintendo and how the IP has evolved over the years. Whereas Bethesda's game design has barely evolved at all. And as a result, Starfield as a whole is suffering because of that. We will never get a New Vegas 2 developed by Obsidian for the simple fact that Bethesda is scared of Obsidian, because if Obsidian were to develop a Fallout New Vegas 2 and that Fallout New Vegas 2 happens to be better than anything Bethesda has done in the past 12 years, then that raises the question, why do we need Bethesda? This is Remo Yes Man, signing out. Peace.